A few months back, I decided to take my dog on a hike in a vast, secluded state forest I love. This forest stretches over nearly 2,000 acres, with long, winding trails cutting through dense trees. It's my favorite spot because it's quiet, remote, and almost always deserted. Just me, my dog, and the peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. The forest has two parking lots, one on the east side and one on the west, separated by miles of dense woodland. That day, I chose the eastern lot. As I pulled in, I noticed mine was the only car there, which felt reassuring. It meant I'd have the forest all to myself, a feeling I cherished. After leashing up my dog, we set off down the trail, eager to explore the wilderness. The sun filtered through the thick canopy, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow on the ground. For the first hour or so, we followed a familiar path, winding between towering trees and thick underbrush, until we reached a spot where the trail intersected with a wide riverbed. The gentle sound of water flowing over rocks was soothing, and on a whim, I decided to veer off the trail to follow the river deeper into the woods. The lush greenery around us felt alive as we trekked another 3 miles, venturing further than I'd ever gone before. The cool, fresh air filled my lungs, and the quiet was almost meditative. I felt a sense of peace wash over me until I heard something strange. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the gentle sound of the river. A soft, distant murmur seemed to float through the trees, like two people engaged in a hushed conversation. I stopped and strained to listen. The woods around me fell silent, but that faint murmuring still lingered, just at the edge of my hearing. I shook my head, thinking it might be an animal, or maybe just my imagination. But the sound persisted, creeping into my mind, tugging at my curiosity. I listened closely, trying to catch a word or two, but the voices were too quiet to understand. They seemed to come from nowhere, yet they surrounded me like a heavy fog. After a moment, the voices faded, leaving me alone in the eerie silence. Shaking it off, I decided it was probably nothing and continued walking, my dog trotting beside me. As we moved deeper into the forest, the trail had faded, and we found ourselves in a deep valley, with steep hills rising on both sides. The climb looked challenging, but I figured it would be worth it for the view at the top. So, with my dog leading the way, we began the ascent up the right hill. The steep incline made every step feel like a workout, and I could feel the burn in my legs. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached a flat area at the top with a large rock that was perfect for resting. I plopped down on the rock, breathing heavily, and let my dog lie down beside me. As I sat there, taking in the breathtaking view, I noticed the way the sun streamed through the leaves, creating a beautiful golden glow. I felt a sense of accomplishment, proud of the distance we had covered. But just as I was beginning to relax, I heard those voices again. This time, they were much closer, almost as if they were right around the bend, near the edge of the cliff. My heart began to race. I had come to this secluded part of the forest to be alone, so hearing voices here was unsettling. My mind raced with questions. Who else would be out here? How did they get here without a car in the lot? I tried to calm myself, convincing myself that it could be experienced hikers or maybe even rangers patrolling the area. But the thought didn't sit right with me. The voices hadn't been loud enough for me to understand the words. They were just a soft, eerie murmuring, like a hushed conversation. I stood up, instinctively calling my dog to my side, and began to head back down the hill. As we descended back towards the riverbed, something even stranger happened. I heard the voices again, but this time they were different. Instead of quiet talking, they were making strange, drawn-out howling sounds, almost like wolves, echoing through the trees. The howling grew louder and more frantic, sending chills down my spine. I could feel my heartbeat thundering in my chest, and my dog seemed just as spooked, pressing close to my leg. Even when we finally reached the riverbed, the eerie cries followed us. The noise hung in the air like a dark cloud, growing fainter as we hurried away, but it was still there, echoing in my mind. I picked up my pace, my heart racing as I glanced around, half expecting to see something lurking behind the trees. I felt like I was being watched, the unsettling sensation crawling up my spine. Finally, after what felt like forever, we reached the parking lot, where my car was still the only one in sight. I quickly unlocked the doors, loaded my dog inside, and drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror until the trees disappeared behind us. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I replayed that day in my mind, the soft murmurs and the strange howling echoing in my thoughts. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The forest that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed dark and foreboding. A week later, I decided to go back. I felt drawn to the forest again, the need to confront whatever had scared me so much. I took a deep breath and packed some snacks and water for the hike. I wanted to explore more, to see if I could find the source of those voices. This time, I parked in the western lot, hoping for a different experience. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed the air felt heavier, as if the forest was holding its breath. The path ahead looked untouched, with tall grass and wildflowers swaying in the breeze. I tightened my grip on the leash and began walking, my dog eagerly pulling me forward. The deeper we went, the more I noticed that the forest felt different. The sunlight struggled to pierce through the thick canopy, casting long shadows that danced across the trail. The sounds of nature seemed muted, as if the forest was in on a secret. I pressed on, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread. We reached the riverbed again, and I stopped to catch my breath. The water flowed gently over the rocks, but today, it seemed to carry a different tone, a soft, almost mournful sound. I leaned down to let my dog take a drink, and that's when I heard it again. The voices. This time, they were clearer, as if they were calling out to me. "Help us." The whisper floated through the air, chilling me to the bone. I jerked my head up, scanning the area for anyone nearby. But there was no one, just me and my dog in the silence of the forest. My heart raced as I struggled to make sense of what I had just heard. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew that was a lie. "Help us." The voices echoed in my mind again, this time accompanied by a faint sense of desperation. My instinct told me to run, but curiosity held me in place. I looked around, my eyes drawn to a narrow path leading deeper into the woods, shrouded in shadows. With a mix of fear and intrigue, I decided to follow the path. My dog stayed close, his fur bristling as if he sensed something was off. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for me. The deeper we went, the more the air thickened with an unnatural silence. After a few minutes, the path opened into a small clearing. At the center was an old stone well, covered in moss and surrounded by thick underbrush. The moment I stepped into the clearing, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I could hear the faint whispers again, but they were no longer just a call for help. They were pleading, filled with an emotion that made my skin crawl. "Don't leave, please." The words were a mix of voices, echoing around me like a chorus of sorrow. I stepped closer to the well, peering down into the darkness. I felt an overwhelming urge to call out, to see if anyone was down there. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear creeping up my throat. "Is anyone down there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, just the soft sound of wind rustling the leaves. But then, just as I turned to leave, a chilling chill swept through the clearing. I turned back to the well, and that's when I saw them, faint shapes swirling in the darkness, moving just below the surface. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "Help us, please." The voices were louder now, more urgent. I felt a tug at my leg, my dog pressing against me, sensing the fear radiating from me. I backed away from the well, my heart racing as I stumbled back onto the path. I needed to get out of there. But as I turned to run, I heard something else, footsteps. They were heavy and deliberate, echoing through the trees. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up as I glanced over my shoulder. In the distance, just beyond the trees, I saw movement, figures stepping out of the shadows, their shapes barely visible. "Stay close," I whispered to my dog, my voice shaking. I turned and sprinted down the path, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The footsteps behind me grew louder, matching my frantic pace. I could feel them getting closer, the sound sending waves of panic crashing over me. I pushed myself harder, willing my legs to move faster, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. As I burst out of the forest and into the riverbed, I didn't stop to catch my breath. I continued to run, the voices echoing in my mind, the urgency of their plea haunting me. My dog was right beside me, keeping pace, but I could feel his unease too. I glanced back, but the figures were gone, swallowed by the shadows of the trees. Finally, I reached the parking lot, my heart racing as I fumbled with my keys. I could still hear the whispers, even as I jumped into the car and slammed the door shut. My hands shook as I turned the key in the ignition, and I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone behind me. But there was nothing, only the stillness of the empty lot and the looming trees. I drove away, glancing back one last time until the forest faded from view. The voices, however, lingered in my mind, and I knew I could never return to that place again. Days turned into weeks, but the memories of that day haunted me. I tried to go about my life, but the fear of the forest loomed large in my thoughts. I felt drawn to it, yet terrified to return. The whispers had woven their way into my dreams, leaving me restless at night. Then, one evening, as I sat on my porch with my dog by my side, I heard it again, a soft, distant murmur carried by the wind. My heart sank as I realized it was the same voice, the same plea for help. "Help us." I stood up, my heart racing. The forest was just a short distance away, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. I felt a pull to go back, to confront whatever was haunting me. But I also felt the weight of fear pressing down on me, warning me to stay away. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the feeling that I needed to return. The whispers grew louder in my mind, intertwining with my thoughts until I couldn't tell what was real and what was imagined. It was as if the forest was calling to me, beckoning me to uncover its secrets. Finally, after a sleepless night, I made my decision. I had to go back. I needed to know what was happening in that forest, and why I kept hearing those voices. I packed a flashlight and a few supplies, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The next morning, I drove back to the eastern parking lot, the familiar feeling of dread settling over me. The forest looked different in the daylight, still beautiful, but there was an unsettling air about it. The stillness felt oppressive, like the trees were watching me, waiting for something to happen. I took a deep breath, trying to muster my courage, and stepped out of the car. The moment I did, I felt a chill run down my spine. I leashed my dog and set off down the trail, each step echoing in the silence around me. As I walked, the memories of my previous visits flooded my mind, reminding me of the tranquility that once drew me here. But that peace felt like a distant memory now, replaced by an overwhelming sense of foreboding. I pushed through, determined to reach the riverbed where it all began. When I arrived, the river flowed quietly, but the air felt charged, heavy with anticipation. I could still hear the whispers, just beneath the surface of my thoughts, urging me to follow them. With my heart racing, I veered off the main trail, heading toward the narrow path I had taken before. As I entered the clearing again, the old stone well stood silently, the moss covering it like a shroud. I approached cautiously, the whispers growing louder, filling the air around me. I peered down into the darkness, the well's depth seeming to stretch infinitely. "Help us." The voices were a mix of pleading and despair, echoing in my mind. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and I stumbled back, gasping as a strange fog began to rise from the well. It curled around my feet, swirling like a living thing. I turned to run, but the fog enveloped me, thick and suffocating. "Stay with us." The voices were clearer now, resonating with a chilling intensity. I felt my legs grow heavy, like I was being pulled into the ground. My dog barked anxiously, trying to pull me away, but I couldn't move. The fog wrapped around me, blurring my vision, and I felt a deep sense of dread settling in my chest. Just when I thought I was lost, a bright light burst through the fog, illuminating the clearing. The whispers faded, replaced by the sound of rushing water. I blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. In that moment, I realized the well was not just a well, it was a portal, a gateway to something dark and unknown. My instincts kicked in, and I broke free from the fog's grip, sprinting back toward the trail. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran, the whispers trailing behind me, urging me to return. I burst out of the forest, gasping for air as I stumbled back into the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. My dog barked and whined, sensing my fear. I rushed to the car, fumbled with the keys, and jumped inside, locking the doors behind me. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figures emerging from the shadows. But there was nothing, only the darkening trees standing silent and still. From that day forward, I avoided the forest. I tried to live my life normally, but the whispers haunted my dreams, creeping into my thoughts at the most unexpected moments. I could feel the forest calling to me, and every time I passed by it on the road, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Then, one stormy night, as rain pounded against the windows, I heard it again. The whispers, louder now, echoing through the dark. "Help us." I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was happening in that forest. With my heart racing, I grabbed my flashlight and headed out into the storm. The rain soaked me to the bone, but I pressed on, determined to confront whatever was waiting for me in the woods. When I arrived at the parking lot, the forest loomed ominously, the trees swaying in the wind like ghosts dancing in the darkness. The air felt electric, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding as I walked down the trail, the storm raging around me. As I approached the riverbed, the sound of rushing water drowned out everything else. But the whispers were still there, rising above the storm, pleading for help. I fought through the fear that threatened to overwhelm me, determined to find the source of the voices. When I reached the clearing, the well stood silently in the storm's fury, the moss glistening in the rain. I felt the pull of the whispers, drawing me closer. I hesitated for a moment, but the urgency in their tone pushed me forward. I leaned over the well, shining my flashlight into the darkness below. The beam illuminated swirling shapes, moving just out of reach. The whispers grew louder, more desperate. "Help us, please." I took a deep breath and called down into the well. "What do you want? Who are you?" My voice echoed back at me, swallowed by the darkness. "Stay with us." The words sent a jolt of fear through me. I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet, and I stumbled back as the fog began to rise again, swirling around me like a living thing. I fought against the urge to flee, feeling an inexplicable connection to whatever was down there. Suddenly, the whispers shifted, growing frantic. "You must help us. We are trapped." I squinted into the darkness, my heart racing as I strained to understand. "How can I help you?" "Break the seal. Free us." Panic washed over me as I realized the whispers weren't just voices, they were souls, trapped in the depths of the well. I felt a deep sense of dread settle over me, but a flicker of determination ignited within me. I had to do something. As I turned to leave, the ground shook violently, and the fog thickened around me. "No, don't go. You must help us." I grabbed my dog, my heart racing, and bolted down the path. The whispers followed me, echoing in my mind, urging me to return. But I couldn't. Whatever was in that well was dark and twisted, and I didn't want to become trapped like them. I ran through the storm, my heart pounding in my chest as I finally reached the parking lot. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, the whispers still echoing in my mind. I jumped into the car, slamming the door shut behind me, and drove away as fast as I could. But the whispers didn't stop. They haunted me day and night, their pleas echoing in my mind. I couldn't escape them, no matter how hard I tried. It was as if they were woven into the fabric of my existence, calling out for help, begging me to return. Months passed, and the whispers only grew stronger. I found myself unable to focus, unable to sleep. I felt the weight of their despair, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. It was a constant battle, and I knew I had to confront my fear once and for all. One fateful night, I decided to go back. I could feel the pull of the forest, stronger than ever. I packed a backpack with supplies, my heart racing as I drove back to the eastern parking lot. The air felt charged with electricity, the storm clouds rolling in overhead. When I stepped into the forest, I felt a wave of unease wash over me, but I pressed on. The whispers grew louder as I neared the riverbed, and I knew I had to face the well once again. As I reached the clearing, the well stood silent, but the fog began to rise, swirling around me like a serpent. I could hear the voices now, a mix of fear and desperation. "Help us, please." I leaned over the well, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want from me?" "Break the seal. Free us." The words echoed in my mind, sending chills down my spine. I had to confront the darkness that lay below. With trembling hands, I took a deep breath and began to search for a way to break the seal. I found a large rock nearby and lifted it, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. The fog thickened, wrapping around my legs as I pressed forward. I felt the whispers growing louder, urging me on. "Hurry, before it's too late." With a final surge of determination, I threw the rock into the well, shattering the surface of the darkness below. The fog exploded outwards, filling the clearing with an eerie glow. The voices reached a deafening crescendo, their cries echoing in my ears. "Thank you. You freed us." Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and the fog began to swirl and twist. I felt the pull of the darkness, threatening to consume me. I turned to run, my heart racing as I sprinted down the path. As I burst out of the forest and into the parking lot, I glanced back one last time. The fog roared in the clearing, swirling around the well like a tempest. I jumped into my car, shaking with adrenaline, and drove away, leaving the darkness behind. But even as I drove, I could hear the voices fading into the distance, their pleas echoing in my mind. The forest would forever hold its secrets, a place of darkness and despair. But I had faced my fears and survived, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what else lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. What other stories remained untold in the depths of the woods? As the trees disappeared in the rearview mirror, I knew I could never return. The whispers would haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the light.